Okay, so let's take a look at some of your examples solving with the quadratic formula. So on A, step number one side has to be 0. Similar to before, you want to keep your x squared positive. So if x squared is positive, and he is over here on the left, then you need to take anybody to the right and move it over with him. Do not make x squared negative. All right, so this -1, I need to add 1 and add 1. So that I have x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. That's step number 1. All right, step number 2, after you do that, you want to identify your a, your b, your c, and plug in. So a is the coefficient on x squared. There's not 1, so it's 1. B is -4, and c is 1. And if you look back at the top of the page, plug that into the quadratic formula. You have to know the quadratic formula, so if you don't, be sure you practice it. It's the opposite of b, so the opposite of -4, plus or minus, that gets us our 2 answers for our quadratics. The square root, I always put my b in parentheses and square it so that I don't mistype it in my calculator. Minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so watch your signs, check everything. Once we do this, we're going to go through, and then step 3 is calculate the value under the radical. Okay, so before I do that, I'm just going to write everything else down that I have. The opposite of a -4 becomes +4 plus or minus the square root of something, I don't know what yet, over 2. And right here is where you're not going to reduce the 4 over 2 yet. We're going to reduce one time at the end. Okay, so I need to calculate the value under the radical. That means in your calculator, you're only putting what's underneath this radical. All right, so I have -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. Just what's under the radical, hit enter, and you get 12. Okay, so I have 12 under my radical, and now we're back to where we were back in section 2.1. When we had something like this, we looked at the radical, we simplified our radical. So 12 can be broken up as 4 times 3. 4 is your perfect square. So 4 comes out as a 2. You can either do this in 2 different steps or 1 step. I'll show you 1 step here, we might do it, or sorry, 2 steps here, we might do it in 1 in a minute. But you have 4 plus or minus. This perfect 4 comes out as a 2. You're left with square root of 3, and it's all over 2. All right, so that is step number 3. Calculate the value under the radical, clean the radical up if you can. Step number 4 then is to pull apart and simplify. When I say pull apart, it's the 4 first term over the denominator, plus or minus the second term over the denominator. And this will keep you from making simplification mistakes. All right, so then 4 divided by 2 is 2 plus or minus. And then over here on the right, 2 divided by 2 goes away and just leaves you square root of 3. So your 2 answers, one of them is 2 plus 3, one of them is 2 minus 3. Okay, on B, if you compare A with B, on B, I need 0 on one side and I need my x squared to be positive. So because x squared is negative, the first thing I'm going to do is get 0 on one side, but I'm going to add this 4x squared to the right instead of moving everybody over to the left because I need him to be positive. So that'll give me 0 equals 4x squared minus 12x plus 11. Okay, so step 1, 0 on one side. After that, identify your A, your B, your C. So A is 4, the coefficient on x squared. B is negative 12, and C is 11. Okay, once you identify those, plug it into the quadratic formula. So it's the opposite of B, the opposite of negative 12, plus or minus a big square root. Underneath that radical is going to be B, negative 12 squared, minus 4A, which is 4, C, which is 11, all over 2 times A. Okay, I'm directly, same exact spot that I was right over here on the left. Okay, once you have that written down, you're going to go through and clean it up, calculate the value under the radical. So this is going to become the opposite of negative 12 will be 12 plus or minus something over 8. And I've got to figure out what that value under that radical is. Okay, so in your calculator, plug in what's under the radical, not including the radical. Okay, so I have parenthesis negative 12 squared. Make sure you use the minus sign, not the negative. So minus 4 times 4 times 11. Okay, so under the radicals, negative 32. And I need to clean this radical up. Okay, so I'm going to have 12 plus or minus, the negative comes out as an I. I'm left the square root of 32 over 8. And if you want to go ahead and break it up in two parentheses right now, you could. Square root of 32, hopefully, we've seen this one before. Hopefully you're getting familiar with it. It's 16 times 2. 16 comes out as a 4. So I have 12 over 8 plus or minus 4i. If the 16 comes out as a 4, you're left with the square root of 2 underneath over 8. And then it's a matter of cleaning up those fractions. Okay, if you don't know what they are in your calculator, like 12 over 8, do 12 divided by 8, enter, and then math, enter, enter. So that's going to give us 3/2 plus or minus. Same thing here, you could do 4 divided by 8, enter, math, enter, enter, to give you 1/2, so it's like 1 over 2. On top with the 1, we have the I squared of 2, so we could just put I squared of 2 over 2. And there's your answer. Okay, the next thing is a checkpoint, so take some time, stop the video, work that, and then check it together in class.